Aaron is not able to join tonight. Aaron Vogel. 1 second. Okay. Page 14, the Biaor. Okay, this is you say this.
Sometimes repeat from maimer to maimer. Those foundation you can check.
So in this maimer, in the Maamer it's very different than B'chlal. Every Maamer is tziyun to a place where this Indian is explained, and you really need all the parts. Yeah. So we'll look at one ois. Let's learn one ois. Biur advarim. Then we'll get back to the shechoro, the white and the black. We'll get back to, but the violet. Hine beina matzel and atzolim tzarich liyas bechinas memutza. Mishkosu beitz chaim shamarmal of perigimel. So the Arizal tells us that there has to be a memutza. He's going to come back to it later. The lav bei mikol inun midas klal, because in the matzil, in the Eibishter, he's so far removed from the midas that there's no way to have a direct connection between the matzil and midas. Va'afilu ba'eses sfiras. When we talk about eses sfiras, the Atzilus, and we say that there's a sfira that's called Chochmah. And what is that? Hainu hakli hamagbil as ha'er the eser sfiras, right? It's the kli. That's nikar b'shem Chochmah, v'chem bebina, v'chesed. Even in the eser sfiras, it's only the kli. It's not the oir. Aval etzem ha'er lo shayach lekroisoi b'shem Chochmah. We can't say that the oir is Chochmah. It has a design of Chochmah. The oir is neutral. Rak oir hamahave sfiras Chochmah. Right? And when we talk about oir, the oir is only a ziv v'ha'ora me'atzmos hamatzah. And therefore, ve'ein poyel shum shinui bimhusei v'atzmosei. That there's no shinui in the Eibishter. In other words, when we talk about the mashal of Oir and Moir, there are all kinds of parts of it to be unpacked. One is the mashal that when we talk about the sun shining through colored lights, colored glass, so it looks like the light is colored. So that's a good mashal. That the oir, that it looks like it's colored, but really it's not colored, right? But there's another nukuda is that there's a moir and there's oir. And the relationship between oir and moir is that the moir is not invested in the oir. In other words, the oir has no etzem of moir. Right? It's not like you have a big cake, and you cut off a little piece. So but that little piece, it has all the ingredients. But when we talk about the mashal of Eir HaMoir, it's like when a person is standing in the mirror. So you see the whole person, but there's nothing of him in the mirror. So here, the Alter Rebbe is emphasizing this part of the mashal, that the Eir, even the Eir is only Eir. It's not moir, right? It's only a reflection. It's not the etzem of anything. It's only ha'ora. And that's why ani avaya leisha nisi. Because everything that's happening is happening to the oir, and the oir it's not an etzem of, it's just the oir. He says, upazeh meturetz kushiyas ha-filosofim, eich kol ha-tearim, we say the Eibishter is Rachum v'Chanun or Chochama. Why is it not Pe'el Shini be'atzmus? Ke'enim shayachim klal la'atzmus. All these things that are happening have no shaychus really to atzmus. So I didn't have a chance to look up the Isafis. So there's the union of raglayim, and ksuvim be'etzba likim, and eine Hashem, and ozna Hashem, v'kayetze. All these things, in other words, in a human body. So the guf has these kelim, and in the nefesh there's a koyach hariyah. Right? So he says, but by the Eibishter, it's not like that, because it's oir. That when we say, he's going to come back to this nukudah, and we have to talk about it a little more in depth. When we say about the Eibishter, when we say that the chayas of the Eibishter in the world is not the same like the neshama in the guf, because the neshama in the guf, every particular chush and koyach that the guf exhibits, koyches really, there has to be in the nefesh those koyches. There has to be a koyach ruchni that's koyach hariyah. Like we say, even if a neshama doesn't have a body, it has the koyach hariyah. Right? The neshama there's a concept of re'iyah and shmiyah. There's like the neshama itself has a spiritual, right? Like we say, l'mayla, they also see. Right? Because it has the same minyanim. Ukvar herich bazeh bepardes sharcha beis berak. And the shalom in the Agdome ein shom she biaru ha'inyan al machem. That they have the right, im kol zeh, even with, in other words, even though it's oyer, eino shayach rak b'eses fidus, but he's gonna. It's even though it's not in the Eibishter, but it's only in the kelim. It's not in the oil. When he says eino shayach rak b'eses fidus, he means it's only in the kelim. You'll see. The other midas, like Rachum, Einoikim, Afshe be'emes, Hamidis elyonis, Einon klal, me'ein v'sug Hamidis shebenivroim. Even though the klal, the midas are different, which I'll talk about in a minute. Yeah. Commission is by Begeres HaKedesh Lahav in Mashal Malutza. Ach im kol zeh, even though they're different, Him shayochim rak b'bchenes hakelim b'eses fidus levad. It's not in the Eidus. It can maimer at the kunezer kula lachazo ich misnaig alma avalav mikol ida midas klal. Okay, let's talk about this let's take apart a little bit for a minute. So when we say that by the Eibishter, the midas are lav mikol, it's not like our midas, and still it's only in the kelim, not in the Eidus. What are we saying? So the mashal, if we say that just like when we say, if you have a sweet apple, the mesikas hatapuach is b'shor it's chesed atzilus. So we understand that the sweetness in the apple is not the same like the chesed atzilus. It could be a shoyrish, whatever, but it's different, right? So we could say by the Eibishter, we have a semblance of midas, but his midas are in a different eif. But there's another nakuda. By us, the inyan of midas are a regesh. The inyan of midas, I'm not even talking about the reactionary part of midas, that I'm nispol from someone else. But b'chlal, the difference between an intellectual experience and an emotional experience is that an emotional experience is subjective. It's a different way of being. This is mind and this is heart. Even though in mind we also have aha moments are a hispilus, but the hispilus of midas is completely different than the hispilus of maimer. So by the Eibishter, that whole notion of hispilus and midas doesn't exist. We say, what does the Gemara say? A person that says, Al kan yagiu rachamecha, the Eibishter who's so compassionate on the bird should have compassion on us. You have to make him quiet. Why? Because the Eibishter's midas are gzeiros. They're not coming from a place of emotion. The midas are, this is the way we do it. It's like an intellectual commitment, not an emotional. It's like by Hashem, obviously we're speaking in very
human terms.
right, very human terms. But even the midas are like maicher, right? But now, so that's one nekuda. But now there's another. There's an additional. In other words, what are we saying here? There's moer, there's oyer, and then there's keli. Right, and even in the maimer, he's going to separate that. In the oyer, there's like the more refined part of oyer, and then there's the more. It's like there's a spectrum within the oyer itself. He's going to, right? So when we say by a human being, we receive midas within a context. You know, there are some therapists that they like to work through, like when a person is upset with something, they like to work through why you upset, right? So let's say a person says, I left home this morning and I asked one of my kids to take care of something. And I came home, it was so important to me, they didn't take care of it. This proves that he never listens to me. Or that, ignore, right? Or that I don't have any value to them, right? So some people say, why are you translating everything in such a way? Maybe something happened for him. Even maybe he's not so functional. The fact that he's not so functional, that's not that he what's that? Yeah, good. Yeshikoya. So we're going into the clouds. Right? Good. So we don't need it. We don't need it. Right? I'll try to create a setting in a minute. I'm recording for one of the chevra. So if a person realizes, we're talking now about that by Hashem, we say that just like by a person there's meichen and there's midas, by Hashem there's meichen and there's midas. But we have to understand that by a human being, midas are subjective. Midas are a reaction. Hashem is not vulnerable to reactions. So there's this concept here. There's this concept. Thank you. Right? There's this concept that by Hashem, his midas are like rules. Why do you have to be kind? Because it's the right thing to do. Not because, I saw the person and now I feel, right? So by the Eibishter, what he's explaining that Hashem's midas are different. So first of all, they're different, that they're much more edel. They're much more refined. Like when you say that there's sweetness in an apple, and sweetness in an apple, in a certain way, is like being kind to someone, smiling to someone. Yeah, but right? So by Hashem, it's also, right? It's on a much higher level, the chesed of Hashem. But besides that, there's another issue that by Hashem, the midas are like matter of fact. It's the right thing. That's what you. Yeah, it's not an emotional reaction.
It changes. It gets more. It gets less. It's straightforward.
Why do we have to do this? Why do you have to send away the mother birds? Because that's what Hashem said. Why do you give tzedakah? You know, I've mentioned in the past this question. We have mitzvahs. When you do a mitzvah, you make a bracha. So why, when you give tzedakah, don't you make a bracha? A kibbud av la'ein. You bring your father a cup of tea, and then you make a bracha. You help him put on a boot or take off a boot. The Maamer Biur, you know, says because then it's not respectful. You're telling your parent, "Oh, you're my project." Right? Why am I doing this? Oh, because I'm getting a mitzvah. Right? It's there's something, right? It's not, why am I giving tzedakah? I don't care about you, the poor man. It's not a mitzvah. Right? But Betzad the Eibishter's perspective, he's not getting emotionally caught up in, this person is suffering. You have to do the right thing. Now, in addition to that, there's another aspect. That by people, because midas are emotional, because they're subjective.
When you're saying by the Abishad mitzvah, it's the way the Abishad perceives us, the way the Abishad perceives our mitzvahs. It's not his.
No, it's Hashem's mitzvah.
mitzvahs.
Hashem has chesed and
Hashem
shchora,
gives tzedakah, Hashem helps.
right? Yeah,
So
mevaker cholim, right? He's not coming from a place of. It's hard to say it, right? But he's not coming from a place of compassion.
He's doing it because he decided that it has to be done.
It's the right thing.
It's like a train. It has railroad and you go.
It's right. You do what's right. You always do what's right. Right? Now he's saying another nakuda, a deeper nakuda, that by people, because the world of midas is emotional, there's a lot of context. So I gave an example. If you ask someone to do something for you, and then by the end of the day you find out they didn't do it, and you get upset.
My first husband to do garbage. He always goes back and maybe at home he was full garbage.
Maybe at home, yeah. So when he comes home and he finds out it wasn't done, he's thinking, why wasn't it done? Because no one listens to me. Right? I'm not valuable enough. If they would take me seriously, but why are you making it about you? Maybe they're dysfunctional. Maybe they have a hard time getting out of bed, b'chlal. They forget everything, right? Why are you projecting it? So by us, all our emotions, not only are we reacting, not only that when we see a poor person, we feel for them and we want to help them, but it also triggers in us. I remember one time I didn't have what to eat. I was stuck in the airport. Right? What Chazal says about giving tzedakah on the day of a fast? That you can't compare when you give a poor man when you're hungry than when you give someone when you're full, right? It's like when you go shopping when you're hungry. So you buy more food, right? So there's a whole package of emotion that by the Eibishter there must be a separation. He doesn't have this whole baggage that gets connected. Oh, I remember what happened to me.
Emotion.
There's no, right? Why am I bringing out this nukuda? Because soon the Alter Rebbe is going to speak very fine. He says it even though by the Eibishter it's different and it's more edel and everything, but we have to know that at the end of the day, who's being kind? The Eibishter is being kind. Right? In other words, just like if someone says, do me a favor, sit down and write something for me. I need you to just write, right? So you say, you're not going to say, oh, your hand did it. Oh, I'm going to be so thankful to your hand because they wrote it for me. He says, so now 1 second. So is it him or it's not him? Right? In other words, like this, we're separating. He's not emotionally caught up and he's not. There's room that it's him, but it's not like for human beings. Right? By human beings, there's a whole package that we're tied up in emotionally and subjectively and our history. There's so much that, right? By the Eibishter, all these layers are removed. Right, so let's take a look. The page 14 in the new maimer over there, in page 14. It's quite at the beginning of the booklet. He says, "Va'afal pikein," even though it's so removed from Hashem, and Hashem is not really midos, but nevertheless, Misyaches kol zeh lo yizbarich mamash. It's really Hashem. Shehu atzma. Right after there's a parenthesis.
Yes, yeah.
Shehu atzma yizbarich mamash harachamon. It's the Eibishter who's having compassion. In other words, it's the Eibishter. It's outside. It's the Eibishter. It's him who's treating page 14, who's treating the person with compassion. And he is the chazdan. He is the one who's being generous. Here's the one that's avenging. It's him. And nevertheless, he's not stuck in it. He's not emotionally, he's doing it, but he's not emotionally entangled in what's being done. And he does it. How does he do it? Al yedei hislapshus ha'or. Shehu yizbarich maimer mimenu ba'kelim. There's a light that emanates from Hashem into these kelim lachayesan. The light of Hashem becomes one with the kelim. Like the mashal that I said before, that when the light goes through colored windows, the light looks colored. The energy becomes chesed. The energy, Hashem's oir, looks like chesed. The ihu, the garmohi, chad mamish, Hashem and the kelim are one. And but still,
the same hour.
Right? He's not changing. He's not reacting. It's not like, oh, what happened here? Right? Even the oir, it's only a ziv. The Leibishter is separate. I gave a mashal before, like when a person stands in front of the mirror. You see the whole person in the mirror, but there's nothing of him actually in the mirror. So you see Hashem's energy. It's a nice reflection, but he's not actually in it. It's just a reflection.
Well, not really. The Eibush Betzim is in everything as well. It's
right. We're not talking from an atzmos position. We're talking from an invested position.
Right.
In other words, you're saying at a certain point everything is Hashem and that's it. But that's at a point where Hashem is not impacted. Here we're talking about in the hislapshus part. So let me give. I want to just give a little hakdama here for a minute. This is from the Tzemach Tzedek, because we're going in this Lekutei. So the Tzemach Tzedek, and you'll see there's also a big hagoah here from the Tzemach Tzedek, a whole amud. The Tzemach Tzedek in their mitzvah secha, he presents a struggle with how could it be that the kelim and atzilus are gvul? How could it be? How could it be that they're the eibishter and they're gvul? You can't be, right? How could it be that the oir is believable and the oir and the kelim are going to connect? How is the believable of the oir going to connect with the gvul and the kelim? It's impossible.
For us, impossible.
But he doesn't answer that. He doesn't say, oh, the Eibishter can do whatever he wants. So he says a very interesting thing. He says, let's say a person sits down to write, they're going to write aleph beis. So in the aleph, the letters go one direction, and in the beis, it's another direction. It's very measured. It's very finite, exactly like this. Who's doing, right? You're doing it. But those limitations of the aleph and the beis, those aren't your limits. You're capable of much more. You don't, right? You could take a pen and you could, just give it to a kid. He'll color up the wall, right? He can write, how long, if you're writing letters, it'll last you for a year. The ink, right? One ink will last you for a year. If you're signing checks for 20 years. That's it. But if you just go like this, right? So the koyach of gvul that you have to write the letter, that's not your limitation. It's the ability that you have to limit your energy, to focus your energy. So he says like this, when we talk about the light in Atzilus, not the kelim, we say the kelim, the Atzilus, chochmah the Atzilus. Chochmah the Atzilus, it's not on its own limited, but chochmah, it has the power to write the letter aleph, the way the letter, it has the power to focus really an energy that relative to the energy in the person is like gvul unbelievable.
It's not like nuclear reaction, nothing. Blow.
Yeah, it's literally like gvul unbelievable. I mean, right? A person has tremendous capacity, and he's writes an aleph. So that's right here. The Alter Rebbe is like a little dance. He's saying that it's gvul, but it's still Hashem, because it's not really gvul. It's the ability to focus the energy. The kelim are the ability to focus what has to be delivered. Chesed. I could deliver chesed. And even that is only in the kelim. Right? It's not now just so that's one nekuda. That's the maimer. That's the tzemach tzedek. Tzemach tzedek has another approach there, but that's one nekuda. The other nekuda is like this. When we say, oh, kelim are also elikus, not just the oides. Kelim are also elikus. What are we trying to say? We learn in Chassidus that there are different sources of energy. We say l'mashal, sometimes when we look at moichin and midos, we look at it as a trajectory. The first sphere is chokhmah. Then from chokhmah, bina is lower. Then lower is chesed. Sometimes we say, you know what? The emotions, they have their own source. Sometimes I could be emotional without my brain. How could that be possible? If midos are a direct flow, right? If the spheres are in order, you can't skip. Yeah, you can't start. I can start with gvura. I mean, usually I start with gvura. Right? How did that happen?
Right.
So Chassidus uses that to prove that really midos, besides that they have a hemshech, chokhmah, bina, das, chesed, gvura, it's true in a certain formula, but they really also have their own connection to Hashem. They have a direct link to Keser. They don't need chokhmah. Now here, when the Alter Rebbe says, you should know, kelim are elikus. What's he saying? Kelim have their own source in the original and that's when we learned it, like the deep in Yonim of Chassidus and Ayin Beis and Samavov. You know, when the Rebbe Rashab really gets it, he always speaks about these two. There's the koyach hagvul and there's the koyach habligvul. Within the Eibishter, there are two sources. Here, the Alter Rebbe goes right to the highest point of this concept, that when we talk about potential is two sides of a coin. If I want, I could do it. And if I want, I won't do it. And that, if I want, I won't, that's the source of writing only an aleph. That I have the power to limit myself. So it's two separate, the power to do, that's one mucker. And not to do, to withhold, that's a sanandazah.
But what do you call it? Isn't that part of say Teresh Tashos? We were saying first we have idols the way they are, and then the way they're brought down. So this whole union is the way they're brought down together through the cotton, through all the.
Oh, so here he
but
speaks.
the art itself is still great. It's not. You're saying that the before Teresh Tashos before it's limited to anything else in the art itself, before it's brought down.
Before the
The Atzilus is before the art?
no.
So it's not vertical, it's horizontal?
Before the before the it's not a Yeminus Moel. By the muscle that the Alter Rebbe brings here in the maimer, he says, by the sun doesn't have a choice. There's a luminary, and the light shines. The sun can't shut off.
I'm in the mood to say I'm up today.
Right? We refer to elikus as a moir, as a luminary. But it's a luminary. Elikus is not a luminary that has no choice. It has to be mashpia. It has a choice. Choice means you have two options. Those two options are the two sources, one of oir and one of kelim. Right? The power to not. You have this incredible power, but I don't have to reveal it. It's optional. I could and I would.
Whatever you said with emotion, it does not flow from the open. You was mentioned, that's why everybody else is the resentment and the resentment.
Yeah.
So emotion under the influence of the Lord.
Yeah. Under the influence of. Yeah. Well, in other words, let's say there are two types of emotions. There are emotions that are a result. In other words, there are two formulas. If I want to move someone, I have two ways that I can do it. One is to touch them emotionally, like to look for their sensitive places, whatever. And the other is to speak to their mind. Right? The other is to attract them intellectually, to see. Let's read a little bit inside. Let's see. He says, it's very beautiful that the Tzemach Tzedek in the maimer, he says that when you say that the kelim are gvul, he says it's not like the light of Hashem that goes into the heavens. Like mamalik olam, right? It has to be limited. It has a certain measure, a color, a chveis, a density, right? Whatever it is. So he says it's not the same. It's not like, just like Shamayim is a keli for the energy in Shamayim, the keli is a keli to the energy. No. The keli is a choice to write the letter Aleph. Right? So he says the neshama in the body is a keli like the Shamayim and Mamalik.
Chooses that.
The neshama in the body, it has to fit. It's not choosing to limit its energy. It's becoming a perfect fit. That's the limit. That's it. It's a right. It's a right. It's an edel idea, the concept, right? So the neshama in the body limits the neshama, and the neshama applies itself exactly to the body. It's a perfect fit. You're saying like a suit, right? So the neshama is forced into a box, and that's why what happens to the body affects the neshama. And then wherever the body goes, the neshama is. It's like one person. Now you're Adam. That's it. But when you say that a person wrote an Aleph, it doesn't mean anything. Tomorrow I can write something else. That's not who I am. It doesn't define me. The pardes shar atzmus v'kelim perek daled. Shafilu ba'ir ve'aziv ha'malubish ba'akelim de'eses firis. Yeah, even in the oir ha'malubish, ein be'atzmus hahu shinui v'govim klal. In that oir, what we call etzem ha'oir, the etzem ha'oir remains clear. It's not colored. Lo din v'lo rachmin, lo yamin v'lo yismael. Like we say, electricity. Here it's a washing machine, there it's a freezer, there it's a heater. Electricity is electricity. It's an issue. Smile, it's an energy. Yeah, the alpha. Yeah. The alpha pi. Shakol pe'ulais elu haboyim erachnim ve'adin. Nishpa v'nimshech me'oir daike. Even though all these things we're getting, what's the energy? It's the earth from Hashem. And it's Ayidei Akelim, but nevertheless, Atzmus Ein Sof remains pure. V'hine Akelim da'atzilis hem gam kein elikus mamish. Iyu v'garmo yichad. Ve'af ha'oir ha'mahav kol aspiris hu rak k'moi ziv ha'shemesh asher einu poyel shum shinui be'etzem ha'moir. And that's earlier. I mentioned this. That when in Chassidus we talk about oir and moir, there are a few reasons why we use that mashal. The one point is that the oir and the moir are completely, that there's nothing of the moir in the oir. It's just a reflection. That's only a ray. Yeah, in order, in other words, what makes the oir? Kedei sheyi ha'erein seif yochei lovei lidei gilui sheyishava mizeh kol asfiris, in order that even though it's oir, but that from the oir they should become spheres, they should become midas. Tzarich liyas mikodim b'chinas memutza. Now he comes back. There has to be a memutza bein hamatzil and etzolim. There's got to be something in between. There has to be some shift, a gear. There has to be something. The oz, only through that middle, yuchal ha'erein sof lahavais ulahachiyos hasfiris. There has to be something that connects them, and that memutza, that is zehu keser. We're not going to talk a lot about this because the Tzemach Tzedek is going to go into a whole ha'ara here. But the point is like this. I'll just give a mashal that the Rebbe uses in a maimer the Rebbe brings, that we know there's this, we have a pasuk, Kamayim Maponim Leponim, Kain Leva Adam Ela Adam, Shlomo HaMelech says in Shir Hashirim, that just as a face reflects in the water, a person's heart reflects to another person. So the Rebbe says, why the face and the water reflect each other, and the two hearts reflect each other. Why? Because they're both made of the same quality. The face is a gashmi, the water is a gashmi, so they reflect. The heart is emotion, the other emotion, but a face is not going to reflect in a heart. Right? So for Oyer Ein Soif to have a connection with chesed, with a measured, articular, right? So it can't. It's completely neutral. It has no shaykhs, right? It's not relatable. They're not in the same world. It's like the Rebbe says over there. It's like, imagine a svara should reflect in water. Yeah, a svara. So you need a memutza. You need some kind of adapter between the oil, and the midah. You need an app. You need an adapter, right? You need something that's gonna replace a female plug on this side, a VGA here, and HDMI there, to bring them together. He says that's the keser. The keser has mibchinas achroina shebamatzu. It has in it some magic, right? It has in it some elikus mamish matzil. It has ebishter. The yeshbei bechina shenikra sheirish hanetzolim, and it has the beginning, the most delicate initiation of the nivroim. Like, what do we look like in the most seminal state, right? At the beginning, it has in it both of these sides. A trace of the Eibishter, a trace. It says, Lochein, that's why we find, whenever we talk about like this is what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya about Klippas Noiga. Klippas Noiga is a mumutza. That's why sometimes it becomes Kedusha, and sometimes it becomes Sholosh Klippas Atmeis, right? It's in the middle. It says, that's why sometimes Keser is called Erein Sof. That's why Nikra Keser Erein Sof. The Hainu, why is that? Mitzad Bechina Ha'achreina Shebamatzel. Because it has in it that inyan. Shebechina Zu Eino B'minyan Eses Firis Klal. It's beyond. It's not Eses Firis. Eses Firis is already Chesed, Chachma. It's pure. Mitzad Bechinas Sheirish Hanetzolim Nimne Be'eses Firis. Yeah, Alkeinu Bechinas Mamutza. That's it. So here, this is another inyan. So just to mention, I'm just putting out the fire. I don't know why this episode it's a brand.
I'm cold, by the way. Pour water.
You pour water, yeah, it makes it worse. So you get 5 minutes, and then you.
Heartburn.
Yeah. So he says like this. The Mekubalim struggle. There's like a big debate about Keser. Is Keser in the Eses Firis or it's not in the Eses Firis? Right? When we make a map, like for the kids, when we make a map, so what happens is Malchus of Atzilus becomes the Keser of Bia. Malchus is in the middle. And it's a little bit out of formation because you have Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, and then you have Netzach, Hoid, Yesoid, and then Malchus is still in the middle. Right? And so Keser, so he says that's why there's the debate, because on one hand it's from the Esesphiris, on one hand it's not from the Esesphiris. So this is a big sugya that Chassidus speaks about, and Chassidus is metavech. It weaves together opinions that the way we understood it were dissent. How do we say it? Yeah, dissenting opinions, like different. We thought that they're arguing, and Chassidus comes that he's all said like this. The Ramak said like that. Yeah, right. Keser of Bria is Malchus that Atzilus becomes Yeredes Liyas Keser of
So in that case, it's more than one keser. Keser with Milcha.
Ishtalshlos Aksorim Zemizeh. Right, the Ksorim, the Ksorim, that the beginning of Ayin Beis, he speaks about the Ksorim. It's
So is there a keser above Atzilus?
Yeah.
There was always a keser above Atzilus.
Yes.
Now you have 5 kesers.
You have more, yeah. The Chlolos, yeah. It's a concept, yeah. So let's take a look. He's coming back to push. Why there has to be a mumutza? Because the Eibishter himself is not the gather of the worlds. You can't say, oh, he was mashpia on Atzilus. He has no shaykhis. He has no language for that, like for such things. Now he needs the mamutza. Now that Tzemach Tzedek has a question. He says, common sense, klotz kasha. How could you say, he used this language, that in Elikus, there's the final level of Ein Sof. Madrega achroino. It's Ein Sof. In Ein Sof, there is no... Masha yesh lahavin. Eich shayich leimar be'Ein Sof. B'chinas achroino. How could you say such a thing? Kilei shayich b'chinas achroino, rishoino. Rak b'mokim sheshayich leimar reish v'soif. Yeah, Hainu, that's the spheres. It's already limited. Chochmes, Reishis, Aishtalshus. Malchus is called Seifer, the called Dargin. That's wonderful. Mashenkin vein Sof Baruch Hu. She'ein leiketz v'reish. He has no end, no beginning. U'poshet b'tachas apshitis. Mal inyim b'chinas achroinu. What do we mean achroinu? V'hoya nira loymar. Al pi mashen is bar b'kama duchti b'pirish maimer azal. Actually, nivra oilam hoyahu shmei bilvad. So essentially, what he's going to explain here about achroino is not the end, but like the lowest quality, right? What do I mean, the lowest quality? Let's say you have, let's say a person there are many ways. Let's say I come into the shul, and I'm curious, when's the last time somebody was here? So I look for traces, right? Oh, does it smell like someone cleaned up? Is the floor clean? Right?
Jeff usually smells cologne.
So we're not minimizing, there's more of the person or less of the person. It's just a very distant right? It's just a trace. It's like just barely. Now we're looking in that idea with Ein Sof. We're not talking now about Ein Sof. We're talking about a trace of Ein Sof. That's what we mean by Bechinas Achroin. You get right, and in order to explain this, he gives the mashal of a person. He says that before Hashem created the world, it says there was Hashem and His name. He says, what does it mean, the name? There was someone around to call him by his name. So he says the name means his potential. his ability. Hashem was always able. So even before the world was created, he was able. So that's what we mean. In the same way, just like with Hashem, you say his name, which means nothing, just like by a person. What's a person's name? Again, there's no DNA in the name. Right, it's a Rishon.
But for a name is Levush.
Remember that
with
in the name, we're talking about ways. Right? Chassidus is metavich. You have, right? We spoke about this many times. When you tell someone, oh, you have a great sense of humor, so they start making more jokes, usually bad ones, right? In other words, when we tell someone, oh, you're such a nice person, would you help me? So we're eliciting their kindness, right? That's one type of calling someone a name. We're calling them with a midah. Another type is to call them by, say, zalman.
Like electricity flow, it doesn't have any partition. It's the same as the beginning, in the middle.
Now, yes, and not originally. If you have a good conductor, you also have a flow.
Right, so what he's saying, 1 second, so let me come back to the shameless for a minute. So we say Reuven Shimon or Chacham Chassid. So when we refer to Hashem, we make a blend of both. Reuven Shimon doesn't elicit anything. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't reveal anything about the person. You have two Reuvens. They're completely different. There's nothing about them that's the same. But they have a name. By the Eibishter, Chacham is the same way it's removed from him, like Reuven.
Different.
But what I'm saying is, when we refer to Hashem, we refer to Sheph, okay, Lakus, Gvur, Shakai, God of war, God of defense. So it's not his, it's us, it's our definition, it's our understanding.
No. So those names draw chayes, but those names draw chayes. It's not from atzmus. It's an oiris. Here he's giving a mashal. The mashal is that before there was a world, there was Hashem and his name. What does it mean, his name? His name means potential. What's a name? A name is the potential that I could call you. If you're a block away, I could call you. Why do you always need a name? Right? You should only when I need to call you, then we'll decide, right? A kid is born, why are you calling him a name? No one has to call him now. Right? Later. We give him a name. What is the name? It's a potential that I could call you. It's Yecholis. The whole Indian of a name is Yecholis. That's what he's saying here. The Eibishter has a Yecholis. We call that Yecholis name. Shmai, who Shmai? Let's read. He says.
So when Moshe asks, "What's your name?"
But no. Moshe is not before the world was created. This is right. It's a mashal. It's a concept. Yeah. It says you do akushia. Ich shayach pedem bris ha'elam nesliz b'chinas shem la'kadosh baruch hu. Mi karei b'shmai. You called him by his name. Is to create the worlds and the essence vidus. You know what it is? It's a shame. And it's called Ein Sof. But Mohusiv Asmusi is Baruch Eibishter himself. Uram v'nisa. And they have violation nisik sitful. V'hine gam kodim shnivroilam. Even before the world was created, Mashayoch Elias Mizgala, the potential that he has to reveal. V'sheyumshach mimenu in the future. This hara and this ziv. V'tzoni apashut. Zeo hanikra b'chinas shmai. That's the shmai. Shahaya achloi nivroilam. That's the name. This ability, this potential, that is Nikra Bechinas Shmei HaKolul B'atzmusei. That's the Eibishter's name. That's Kolul B'atzmusei. The name that he and his name. That's it. So Indian. That's what we mean when we say that there's Bechinas Achroino Shebematzu. The last darga in Hashem. The last darga doesn't mean his toe. Right? It doesn't mean his last dollar. We emptied all his dollars. This is the last dollar. The last dollar means it's the most remote trace of Hashem's ability or of Hashem. So ayin ve'efes mamash lagabe atzmusefulu. A name lagabe a person is mamash nothing. Umibchina zu levad hu shenimshach liyas atik v'keser atzilus. From this shmai, that's the source of atzilus. That's the source of all finite existence. Now, the yitztak ma'oid will be very proper. Likreizeh b'chines achroino. What's explained in another maimer, that doesn't define the Eibishter. I mentioned here in the shir a few months ago that in the Polish Hasidische Welt they refer to the Eibishter as Bashefer, like Yom Tov Erlich in the song. Der Bashefer, you know what I mean? Like the Bashefer. In Chabad, we don't use that terminology. We say Eibishter, right? What's the difference? Bashefer, the whole Eibishter is that he created the world. That's his whole power. That's his whole. That's this definition. Eibishter, Eibishter, as high as there is, there's higher. Yeah. So that's not the Eibishter that he created the world. Even if the Eibishter didn't create the worlds, it's not like, oh, now he's entertained. Before he was bored, now he's got a job now.
He created a minion to sort of take care of the world, keep me out of it. I'm here. You take care of the little bone. I says,
That's the spirit. Hello.
No,
Shmai. He says, it's just the order. That reflection is chaye hachayim shel kol ishtalshu so'ilumis. That's the source of the whole worlds. And that's why that's the lowest level. And I want to stop here because 9 o'clock will stay true, and we'll do some more research. We'll learn some more Maamerim, and next week we'll unpack it a little more.
I saw first time in the maimer that we know the hair comes from the moor.